Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is part two of the Ukraine war news update for the, 29th of July 2023. We're going to start with the Frontline update. There's not a massive amount of information coming out. There's been a lot of activity over the last 48 hours, and I guess some of that activity has kind of come to the end, like Staromilsky has been liberated. And there's been some huge fighting around Robotna. It could be that they are just clearing up some of these settlements, or in other places, maybe licking their wounds a bit, or still pressing on but operational security. Just trying to work out exactly what's going on everywhere is quite challenging. Just to refer here to Kenneth Gregg, who's the Finnish fighter in Ukraine, who casts his opinion on certain things and does have contacts on the ground, but isn't fighting at the moment himself. Again, take what he says with a pinch of salt. As I always say, the liberation of Staromilsk was done by the 35th Marine Brigade, together with the Array Battalion of the 129th Home Guard Brigade. This is interesting because the media is now spreading information that it was a massive heavy attack from our side. This is what we used: some tanks and about 12 armoured personnel carriers and a lot of mortar and artillery fire. We wore them down for about 1.5 weeks, and then we destroyed some of the Russians' armour yesterday as they took off. They left behind a lot of material, including tanks, which we will now use. So the forces that liberated the community were a combination of an elite force and the Home Guard. And according to first-hand information, the cooperation worked flawlessly. This shows the quality of our Home Guard units, especially when they consider where and how we started training these soldiers in February 2022. We did not even have uniforms for them, and training took place indoors in basements and half-finished high-rise buildings. We could only move outdoors in April 2022, and even then in very primitive conditions. Practicing attacks and taking trenches was impossible. We had only theoretical training. Now our Home Guard is as competent as many countries' army units. And then he goes on to talk about that APC, or that IFV that approached the trench and then dropped in the trench that I've showed you and talked about a bunch, and he's pretty much says exactly the same thing, that it just shows there are no mines in the area, no ATGMs, and it's a good place to attack. I thought that was interesting. I think there's probably quite a difference between what's happening in Staromilsky and what's going on at Robotna. Robotna seems really difficult. There's so many defenses around there, major trench lines and whatnot, that it is just incredibly expensive in terms of material and troops for the Ukrainians to gain ground there. Though they are gaining ground, it's just at quite an expense. So let's go to Suryat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, to see what they say about the different areas. Their updates yesterday were that the Russians made some gains in the Liman Pershi Sinkivka area up there. So towards Kupiansk and next to the Oskil River, some small gains there. And as we come further down that eastern front in Luhansk Oblast, we come down to Terny, just sort of northwest of Crimea and the Serebyansky Forest. There's just a small gain for the Russians on that front. Have restarted advances west of Zytlivka, so that may be another attempt to try and distract the Ukrainians in the Luhansk Oblast. There are differing claims. I was listening to Andrew Perpetua's live stream last night talking about that area north of here, west of Svatove, where Karmazianivka, etc., where the Russians made loads of gains, and they were talking about this mixture of like whether the Russians really did overegg what they'd taken, and also Ukrainians hitting back, and they certainly don't have as much land up there as was initially claimed for one of those two reasons or both those reasons, but that seems to be stabilized up there. Actually, that's Staromilsky. That should come a little bit later. Then we're going to come on to all this has stopped working. Kurdyamivka. So the Ukrainians on the outskirts of Kurdyamivka. This is to the south of Bakhmut, where there is gains for the Ukrainians there. Here we see Kurdyamivka, Zenopilia, Zelenopilia, sorry, 1.3 square kilometers has been added to the liberated status. AFU, the Ukrainians are now 300 meters north of Kodiivka and 800 meters west of Zelenopilia. Andriivka is possibly being sort of there are different claims of whether that has been liberated, whether it's empty but not yet liberated. There are various claims about Klishchiivka itself, which is north of there, where the Russians may well have put up quite a fight there and have tried to hold on to that, and it's still contested. There are claims about them take the Russians counterattacking and taking part of it back or all of it back, depending on who you listen to, and then other claims like no, that's nonsense. So, not 100% sure what's going on in Klishchiivka today yet, but I will look into that ahead of my Frontline update. And then, I think safe to say that Bakhmut is one of the areas of most success for the Ukrainians, and indeed listening to again Andrew Perpetua last night, really interesting claims about what's going on north of Bakhmut. In fact, I'll just get the map just to give you an idea. So this is Andrew Perpetua's map, and he was talking about with Language Learner, who I've interviewed myself, and Konstantin, who both, they all have their contacts in and around Bakhmut and the front line as a whole. But they're talking about, stuff going on in the south around Klishchiivka and Kodiivka, as I've just been saying. The Ukrainians are having some success there. They might be finding it a little bit slower just in Klishchiivka just at the moment, as the Russians are piling in everything they can to hold on to that. It's really important to hold that defensive line there, because then they get pushed back to this. They do have a defensive line along this road, which is, as you can see from I think the contours there, it sits on higher ground. But these settlements being liberated would leave this open, and then there are other places that are strategically important, sort of south of Bakhmut. In fact, they were arguing even more important than Bakhmut itself. Kadema is one of them. I don't know if that's this place there. It's in Cyrillic writing, but sitting on high ground, that kind of means that if you have that, then Bakhmut becomes pretty difficult. But one of the most interesting things they were saying is that they have footage. They can't really show it because it's really inappropriate, but they have footage. And this goes to what Matt Bishop, who I interviewed the other day as a live stream. He's living in Perth at the moment, but is married to a Ukrainian, was living in Kharkiv and knows some people still in Ukraine, who's sending him some footage. And Andrew Perpetua, Konstantin, and Language Learner are like, yeah, we've got footage of Russian trenches that are just full of dead bodies. Just in the northern area, so Bakivka and around here and around the north here, it's just absolute carnage for the Russians. But they are throwing everything into that to keep it under Russian control, because if there are kind of three elements here. You've got Zalizhnyansky, and you've got this area here, Dubovo Vasilivka, and you've got Bakivka. And if any one of these goes, then it means that this road is interdicted, and all of it goes. And so they're trying desperately to hold on to all of them, but at quite a cost. And there are just huge losses. So when you hear about the Russian losses from the Ukrainian General Staff on a daily basis, and they're pretty high numbers today, notwithstanding, you understand that, the Russians are losing a lot of troops, and there is visual evidence of that happening, even if you don't always see it, because either it's not released for, operational security reasons, or it's, pretty offensive, and, some people don't show it, so on and so forth. Anyway, so it's tough fighting in the north, but the Russians are holding on and making it very slow going for the Ukrainians, but at quite a considerable cost. Moving on then to the Donetsk and onto Zaporizhia front lines in the south. After yesterday liberating Staromyrsky, Ukraine has advanced to the outskirts of Urozhainy. 4.5 square kilometers have been added to liberated status, says Global War Monitor. Pro-Russian sources claim that village defenses are collapsing, and that is something I've heard in a number of places. Romanov, who's a pro-Russian source, who reported 2 days ago that Staromyrsky would be liberated, is now reporting that Russian defenses in Urozhainy are on the brink of collapsing. He states that the various commanders there are peeing themselves after having to inform Moscow. This is exactly how I would expect it. There's no way that you could maintain control of Uruzhani, having lost Staromilsk and being pressured from the east as well. So yeah, that's as you would expect it. I'm pretty sure that will be liberated today or tomorrow. And there are some success. I don't really know what's going on in Robotina at the moment, but if you go further to the west to a place, I'll just show you very quickly on the map. So we were talking about Velika Novosilka there, and this area of Uruzhani being under pressure because Staromilsk has been liberated, and it's very difficult to supply Uruzhani, continue to supply, and then arguably as well, this area there will be under heaps of pressure. And then as we go to the west, we have Robotina, where the Ukrainians have made gains, but they have also had some pretty significant losses there, and they're struggling to sort of take areas, going into these larger trench lines there as well. Possibly greater success to the to the west of Robotina, but slower, but more cohesive. They were talking about how the command is different group active there, and they seem to be, a lot more sensible in their approach. Just it's not throwing people at the problem and trying to take places quickly, but grinding the Russians down there. Then there is success in Kamyansky here. So this is near to the reservoir, or as it was, and there is evidence to suggest that the Ukrainians are making some gains there continually, which is really good news. And yeah, Russians targeting Ukrainian forces southeast of Kamyansky, confirming their presence on the other side of the canal. The Ukrainians have already progressed further south, so that's no reports there. So yeah, I'll give you a more robust update in my frontline update a little bit later. Right, moving on to military aid now, and not a huge amount to report. So, China supplies technology for electronic warfare, spare parts for fighter jets and navigation equipment to Russia. This is building on what I was saying yesterday. I'm talking about this first because I think it's just really, really important. China are helping Russia, and although it might not be with equipment that is lethal, like weapons and ammunition, they are providing an awful lot of stuff that can be either co-opted to be used in lethal weaponry, such as microchips and whatnot for missiles, but also electronic warfare components that mean that you know, Russia can execute successful offensive operations and defensive operations in Ukraine using kind of electronic warfare, spare parts for fighter jets, navigation equipment to Russia. That's Reuters. So, in addition, according to the publication, the Russian Federation has increased trade relations with China, and the settlement in yuan has also increased. So this is not good. There needs to be some really robust response to this because China is extending the length of this war by doing that. And they are increasing the chances that Russia will prevail. I don't think Russia can prevail, but this acts uh, to go against everything that the allies of Ukraine are attempting and Ukraine themselves, and goes against their kind of own rhetoric of sovereign territory that they have actually at times expressed. So yeah, that's not cool from Russia. From China, certainly not cool from Russia either. Right now, going on to aid to Ukraine, there is sometimes a bit of confusion in terms of whether aid provided is new aid, newly pledged and delivered aid, or whether this has already been pledged and we've already clocked it and it's now delivered. I think this is stuff that's been pledged already that we knew about that's now being delivered. Germany has sent a new package of military aid to Ukraine, according to the website of the German government. In particular, it included 20 reconnaissance drones, 13 vector reconnaissance drones, RQ-35, 20 of them, 13 vector drones, 6 Gepards, 1 A2 self-propelled anti-aircraft guns, 10 tracked all-terrain vehicles, a BV-206. That is this thing, sort of thing you'd more expect to see in snowy areas. The Bandvan, 15,000 cartridges for Gepard and 2.6 thousand smoke shells. Something that they certainly could have done with in that attack on Robotina. And yeah, so that's reported verity, but some reports have other vehicles. So 8 ambulances also thrown in there. Those are the Van. And someone here saying as well in the English version, it forgets the 5 border protection vehicles. So a whole range of stuff from Germany. Germany are just continually coming up with the goods at the moment. Really important supporters of Ukraine, and not only from the government, but also from Rheinmetall. Rheinmetall are right involved in everything. Rheinmetall trains Ukrainians to repair Leopard tanks and also plans to start the repair work in Ukraine in a few weeks, says CEO Armin Papika. That's super, super important because, yes, they are repairing Leopards. If they've just thrown a track or whatever, you can repair that behind the front lines fairly easily. But if they need more fundamental repair, they're having to be sent all the way back to sort of Germany and or Poland, and that takes those vehicles out for longer. You need those vehicles back on the front line as soon as possible, and that means repairing them in Ukraine, ideally. Qatar has allocated $100 million to overcome the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, said the country's prime minister. I did report that previously, but there was a big sort of handshake, and it's really important, I think, that the Middle East, uh, other nations outside of your classic Western nations, whatever that means, are helping Ukraine. It's important that Africa play a part. It's important the Middle East play a part. This is about global stability and about what kind of world you want going forward. And I don't think Russia being at the head of that world is a good thing. So it's really important, I think, for everyone that Ukraine prevail. It's good for democracy. I mean, they are fighting for democratic values. Speaking of which, the African Union, this is moving on to geopolitical stuff, which consists of 55 countries, called on Russia to immediately resume the UN brokered grain deal. Now, this is super important because this is right on the back of the Russia Africa conference in, I think, St. Petersburg, which is, a case of Russia trying to curry favor with the African continent, uh, and trying to say that, hey, we're not responsible for the grain deal collapsing, and actually it's not a problem because we're going to provide you with grain ourselves and all this kind of stuff. The African Union have come out and said, of 55 countries, no, you need to resume the UN brokered grain deal. Politico reports this with reference to a statement by Comoros President Azali Assoumani. Comoros is an African nation, if you weren't aware of your geography. We will talk about it in St. Petersburg. We'll discuss it with Putin to see how we can restore this agreement. Then you have this, and this is great. So Cyril Ramaphosa gets a lot of bad press in pro-Ukrainian circles because obviously South Africa part of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, this kind of a group of countries that have other nations that are possibly going to join or become affiliate members or whatever. It's all about changing the US hegemony, the supreme power that US has globally, and try and replace that, or have a multipolar world where you've got China and Russia, or BRICS, and then you've got the US. And in fact, BRICS takes over the US in terms of power globally. So those nations in BRICS are looked upon kind of skeptically by Ukraine and by Ukrainian allies. And South Africa possibly been helping Russia a little bit. There was talk of the naval vessels doing some exercises with the South African navy, so the Russian naval vessels, and one of them, being in ports in South Africa, and then under the cover of darkness and secrecy, they filled that ship up with a load of stuff. No one knows quite what it was. They just saw it in containers or whatever, put on the Russian naval vessel, and then that goes back to Russia. And it looks like you're just taking a bunch of weaponry from South Africa there. So yeah, but then Cyril Ramaphosa is not the most popular guy amongst Ukrainian allies. However, he's come out and done a good thing yesterday, from what I can gather. He's gone off script, as Tim White said. We did not come here for gifts. We propose to restore the grain corridor, said Cyril Ramaphosa. He added that Putin's offer of free grain will not be enough to ensure food security. So he's actually, said, no, that ain't good enough. And we need the grain deal back on, and so on and so forth. So I think that's good. More of that, please, Cyril, if you don't mind. disqualified Ukrainian fencer Kharlan is reinstated. So I reported this. Although reinstated doesn't mean that she was allowed to continue in the tournament that she was disqualified from, but she will have a Paris Olympics place. The International Fencing Federation announced on July the 28th it was reinstating Ukrainian fencer, allowing her to take part in the team competition at the World Championship in Italy. So she can take part in the team one, but yeah, she's out the individual. Emmanuel Katsiadakis, the president of the FIE, the fencing federation, I guess, said the decision had been taken after consultation with the International Olympics Committee. So the IOC actually put quite a bit of pressure on them. They weren't big fans, which is good because the IOC have kind of been potentially appeasing Russia to some degree, Russia and Belarusian athletes. And they have said that they can't, although the IOC has recently come out and said that they can't compete at the Olympics, but they haven't made a decision on whether they can compete under neutral flags. So, under a neutral flag. So the IOC doing a good thing there and putting pressure on the fencing committee. So, right, moving on to this, I think, is pretty good news. So, three-quarters of Americans believe it is important for the United States that Ukraine wins the war against Russia. 86% of Democrats and 71% of Republicans share the same opinion. I've often talked about how Democrats are more likely to support war efforts in Ukraine. That's still the case. And I know probably most Americans that are watching this will be will be Republican or lean Republican. And I know this sometimes annoys you, but it's the data, right? Because you may not be representative of the Republican base at large. Okay, so that's worth bearing in mind. But there's been a significant difference in attitudes between Republicans and Democrats in the US. What's important, though, is what the elected officials think, and that there's still great bipartisan support for the Ukrainian war effort. Now, I think this is still pretty good, though, even though there is a difference between Democrats and Republicans in opinion. Actually, there's still 71% of Republicans think that, and that is a pretty decent majority there. So I'm pretty cool with that. It's a survey conducted by the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. I don't know whether there'll be a selection bias or don't know what their methodology is there, but I think that's pretty good news. Viktor Orban, his anti-Ukrainian attacks have reached a new level. So he's obviously the premier in Hungary and very pro-Putin, pro-Russia. Orban alleges that the EU funds are withheld from Hungary because Brussels has spent it on supporting Ukraine, which is a clear lie. EU funds are frozen due to rampant corruption and rule of law violations in Hungary. So, all I explained to you the other day, all that the EU has at their disposal for like dealing with this kind of behavior from nations that do democratic backsliding is withholding funding. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure there is a protocol in place for kicking a nation out of the EU. I talked about how you have to jump through loads of hoops to get into the EU. So transparency, lack of corruption, democratic values and institutions and mechanisms, all these things that are really, really good, right? So there you've passed the test, and this is what Ukraine have to do to get into the EU. So Hungary have passed those tests, but then once you're in, and we've seen this in Hungary, we've seen this in Poland to a degree. There's democratic backsliding going on, and we're going to get rid of the judiciary in a way that it's like that, and it's going to be just an arm of the government, and then there won't be freedom of press, and there won't be this, and universities will be constricted, and blah blah blah, and all these things where you're like, oh, this is not looking good in Hungary. What does the EU do with that? How do they either kick them out or get them to reform? And really, it comes down to bribery as being the main tool, which is you've got a load of funding that you are due, but you ain't going to get it until you sort yourselves out. So that's what's going on. But obviously, Orban's here saying, "Oh, they're not paying us because they don't have the money. It's all gone to Ukraine," and that's arguably just a complete lie. Right. Final thing to say. This is Maria Zakharova, who Maria being drunk again, spokeswoman for the Russian Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stated that Ukrainians hate and are very aggressive towards Putin because they would like Putin to be their president, but have to choose from what the West gives them. Oh, the West gave them Zelensky. They made them vote for Zelensky. Load of nonsense. Really, they want Putin. Yeah, they hate him, but that's only because they want him. Go away, stupid person. Anyway, that's the end of the news today. Please like, subscribe, and share. Sorry for my unprofessional outburst at the end then, but just come on. Who do you take us for? We're not stupid. Do you I often think, like, do you genuinely believe any of the stuff you state, or do you just before you go live on camera, do you go, oh, I've got to steel myself up because I'm going to be spouting a load of BS. I don't believe it one iota, but I've got to say it because it's my job. And if I don't say it, I'm going to be falling out the window pretty soon. Right. Okay. Lies, lies, lies. Come on, lies. Let's do it. Right. And going out and just lying. Blah, 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 blah. Lies, 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 lies. Excellent. I still have a life. Literally. Is that what goes on? Or are they so far into that bubble that actually that's genuinely what they believe? I can't believe that any rational person would espouse such nonsense as that and believe it. Anyway, I am continuing my unprofessional outburst maybe at the end here. Meh, whatever. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate all your support. Please like, subscribe, and share, and do all those YouTube things and hit bells, blow whistles, jump up and down, and shout. Thank you. Speak soon.